Today's daf we're going to be learning is Samach Vav, Bava Batra daf Samach Vav. Today's daf is sponsored by Sarah and Ina Pasternak in honor of their first wedding anniversary. We fell in love studying the daf and look forward to remaining chavrutas as we build a home full of Torah together. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran women of Long Island in honor of their friend and co-learner Miriam Eckstein Koas on the engagement of her son Daniel. May Daniel and Talia build a bayit Naaman Yisrael firmly grounded in Torah and Chesed, and may all of Am Yisrael see smachot. Okay, we're going to start where we finished, which is, if you remember, our topic in the Mishnah, okay, we have to just build everything to get to where we're up to. There's a study guide for today, which should help you also organize. We started with a Mishnah which dealt with if you sell a house, which movable parts are included, or I should say movable in quotes, right? Because we're talking about which, not exactly movable, but which items in the house are included or not, as opposed to, let's say, the previous Mishnah, which was talking about things that are built like a bore and a dude and cistern, a well, things like that. But now we're talking about parts of the house or items that are used in the house, but aren't necessarily going to be included in a sale. And the main distinction really we had, and this is going to be the big discussion, is between movable items and less movable items, we should say. So the more that they are set in the house, like the door, they're going to be included in the sale. If they're more easily movable and removed, like the key, they're not going to. Okay, and then we had things that are kind of in the middle, but yet, like let's say the oven and the kirayim are not part of the sale. The itztrobil is, not the kalet. They have the different parts of the millstone. And then we have the machteshek kfu'ah and not the mitaltelet. So according to the Mishnah, if it's a machteshek, okay, and that's going to be our real topic, the mortar, which is attached to the ground, that's included. If it's not attached to the ground, then it's not included. And then we quoted a braita, which showed that this is in fact a debate between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis. Our Mishnah seems to go by Rabbi Eliezer, who says even though it was a vessel to begin with, but it's attached to the ground, we're going to view it as if it's attached to the ground. The rabbis said, no, we're only talking about a mortar that was built into the ground, but not a mortar that was first a kli and then attached to the ground. That's a vessel. And that basically would not go with the sale of a house. To which the Gemara brought another situation where we have this distinction between something that was a vessel and then attached to the ground to something that was never, that was created in the ground and was never a vessel in and of itself on its own. So they took this Tosefta Mikvaot, which all talked about a pipe that is either hollowed out from the ground, in which case you could pass your water through to get to the mikveh because it's not considered what we call mayim shuvim. Water collected in a vessel disqualifies the mikveh. But this isn't, because it was attached to the ground and never, right? It was always either I hollowed it out from the ground or I attached something to the ground which wasn't yet a pipe, and then I hollowed it out while it was attached to the ground. That would be considered the ground. However, if I hollowed it out first, created a pipe, then attached it to the ground, that would disqualify the mikveh because that's called a kli. To which the Gemara, and I want to clarify something yesterday, I said it was a statement, but really it's the Gemara's asking a question. The Gemara wants to know, who does this Tosefta accord with? It doesn't seem to fit with Rabbi Eliezer, and it doesn't seem to fit with the rabbis. Now, the answer to that question we're only going to get to later. But before they answer that question, the question is basically saying, we know there's a machloket Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis about this, and neither side seems to fit with what it says here. Now, before we say, oh no, it really is going to accord with one of those, because it can't possibly be it doesn't fit with Rabbi Eliezer, it doesn't fit with the rabbis, the Gemara is going to first explain, though, which machloket Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis we're talking about. And the first obvious choice was the braita that related to our Mishnah that I just discussed, where we distinguish between the machteshek kfu'ah and the machteshek mitaltelet. And then it says perhaps that's where they thought it didn't accord with Rabbi Eliezer, to which we said, because again, Rabbi Eliezer said we're going to view it as attached to the ground. And even if it was a vessel first, and this says if it was a vessel first, it's not viewed as attached to the ground. But then we suggested that maybe that was a unique halacha for sales. When it comes to sales, we'll view this as part of the sale because maybe Rabbi Eliezer holds when it comes to sales, the buyer is always very generous, and therefore, we're going to include it. And the rabbi said we're not going to include it because a seller is not generous. And perhaps that's a machlok that has nothing to do with other topics. To which the Gemara then said, okay, let's keep searching farther. Now we get up to where we ended, which is maybe the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer that didn't seem to work out with this Tosefta Mikvaot is Rabbi Eliezer de Kaveret Dvorim. Ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah, the Mishnah in Masechet Shvi'it, Kaveret Dvorim, I'm at the bottom of Samach Hamud Bet now. כוורת דבורים, רבי אליעזר אומר, הרי היא כקרקע וכותבים עליה פרוס בו ואינה מקבלת טומאה במקומה, והרודה ממנו בשבת חייב חטאת. Okay, that was a mouthful, but it all really means one and the same thing, which is, if you have a beehive, which the Rashbam explained to us, we're talking about a beehive that was attached to the ground, which obviously was a beehive first, and then got attached to the ground. So Rabbi Eliezer says, we're going to view this like karka. Okay, this is as if it's attached to the ground for all sorts of issues, right? Which means by kinyanim, how you acquire it is going to be like land, not like movables. You can write a prosbal document because if you want to borrow money and then they want to do it with a prosbal, okay, where the loan won't be canceled. Now, it's in my interest if I'm borrowing money because otherwise you might not lend me money if we can't write a prosbal. The only way we could do a prosbal on this is as long as I own land. If I don't own land as the borrower, we can't write a prosbal. So if I own a kaveret dvorim, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it's as if I own land. Well, what, and this is a big topic we're going to discuss today, what are things that can become impure? Vessels. The ground doesn't become impure, only vessels. So it can't become impure, this kaveret dvorim. Okay, if let's say someone touches it who's tamei, they don't make the vessel impure. Why is that? Because, right, let's say it comes in contact with a dead body, because it's not susceptible to impurity at all, because it's not even a vessel. And these are all one and the same things. We're going to view this as a vessel entirely. And therefore, we're going to view it as attached to the ground entirely, my mistake. This is clearly attached to the ground and therefore viewed like the ground. Now, if I uproot spices that are attached to the ground, I pull them out on Shabbat, forbidden, right? That's an isur d'oraita. It's called tolesh, it's a toladav kotzer. You can't cut things that are attached to the ground. So if I remove honey from the honeycomb, right, from the beehive where the honey is growing or created, I can't remove it from there because it's attached to the ground. And if I do so, and let's say I didn't realize it was forbidden, I am chayav chatat. I did it bishgaga, unwittingly, I would have to bring a sin offering because I did something that's forbidden by Torah law. So what do we see here? Rabbi Eliezer clearly views this kaveret dvorim, this honeycomb, as attached to the ground. And then we would say, remember, it was a honeycomb that then was attached to the ground, cemented into the ground. We view it as attached to the ground. That's going to go against this mikveh thing, because what is the mikveh thing, right? And I mean, we should see the chachamim in a minute, but we're going to say, right, in the mikveh, it depends, right? Sinor shechakiko ulevasof kav'o posel et hamikveh. But kav'o ulevasof chokiko, right? If, one second, right, he's going to view it as attached to the ground. If he views it as attached to the ground, in that first case, a tzinor, the first we created and then attached to the ground, disqualifies the mikveh. Why? Because we view it as a vessel. And he says, what do you mean? We view it as attached as the ground itself. Remember, I can pass a pipe through pass water through the ground to the mikveh. I just can't pass it through a vessel. But he doesn't view it as a vessel, and maybe that's the Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, just to continue, let's see the chachamim there. Chachamim obrim eina kikarka. The chachamim is saying, no, this honeycomb is not like the ground. Ein kotvin ala prusbal umekabelet tumah b'mkoma v'rodeh mimenu b'shabbat patur. Says all the opposite things of Rabbi Eliezer, which, by the way, would sound like it fits with the Mishnah, with the Tosefta Mikvaot, right? Remember, the whole thing doesn't fit with not Rabbi Eliezer and not the rabbis. The rabbi's position here actually views it like a vessel, and maybe that would kind of correspond. But right now, we're just looking for Rabbi Eliezer. So, they'll get to Chachamim soon. Anyway, the Chachamim said this is not like land. It's not acquired like land, even though it's now attached to the ground. At least that's how we understand it right now. You don't write a prosbol on it because that's not considered land. Doesn't mean you're a landowner just because you own this. And it is susceptible to impurity because it's a vessel. And if you take the out honey from it on Shabbat, you're exempt from a korban chatat. Okay, perhaps you shouldn't do it on a rabbinic level, but on Torah level, for sure, this is a vessel. You're not detaching something from the ground. It's not considered attached to the ground. But the Gemara again is going to say this is not a fair comparison. Why? This is a unique halacha when it comes to this kaveret volim. It has a very unique halacha. And that's because they're going to now explain, Hatam keda'amar Rabbi Eliezer tama. Okay, don't get confused between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Eliezer. Let's just clarify. Rabbi Eliezer is the Tana who appears in this Mishnah, in Masechet Shvi'i, arguing with the rabbis, and, right, is the one we're discussing here. He's the Tana, living in the Tanaitic time period. Now we're saying Rabbi Eliezer, who's an Amora, who was a student of Rabbi Yochanan, if you remember, Rabbi Eliezer, who lived in Israel, Rabbi Eliezer explained to us that the reason for Rabbi Eliezer's position about the kaveret volim, which is a unique halacha, and then it has nothing to do with our topic. And then we're going to ignore this, right? This comparison is going to be rejected. What's the reason? Okay, so they were basically saying, oh, that's got its own reason. As Rabbi Eliezer said, what is it? Amar Rabbi Eliezer, my time at Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, now we start the quote. As Rabbi Eliezer said, what is the reason for Rabbi Eliezer? Dichtiv vayitbol ota b'ya'arat hadvash. Rabbi Eliezer came up with a drasha on a pasuk in Sefer Shmuel. Remember, there's this story where they go out to war, and Shaul, who's king at the time, says to everybody, don't eat from the honey. And his son, Yonatan, eats from the honey. Full story there. You can go look it up. In any case, what does it say there? He dipped it. He had a stick, I believe it was, if I remember correctly, and he dipped it in the Ya'arat Hadvash. Now, why is it called Ya'arat Hadvash? Okay, the Ya'ara of the honey. Now, Ya'ar means forest. So he says, from there we learn about this, about honey, the nature of honey. Ma ya'al hatolesh mimenu b'shabbat chayav chatat. They basically compare honey to a forest. This is the drasha. Okay, again, this is Rabbi Eliezer, the Amora, giving a reason. We don't really know the reason why Rabbi Eliezer said it, but he's explaining Rabbi Eliezer why he thinks Rabbi Eliezer said this, because he darshan this ya'arat vash. Okay, either he came up with that on his own, or he had a tradition that this was the reason for Rabbi Eliezer. We never really know if it was learned by tradition and it was passed down from Rabbi Eliezer. It got all the way to Rabbi Eliezer, or if this is Rabbi Eliezer's theory about it. But he said, Ma yara tolesh mimenu b'shabbat chayav chatat, just like in a forest, if you cut down a tree in a forest, right, or pick something off the ground in a forest, berries, let's say, you're liable to korban chatat. That's forbidden, obviously. Af dvash, so likewise, honey. If you take honey off the honeycomb, you are obligated to chatat. Now, this is going to change everything. Why? Remember the Rashbam said we're talking about a honeycomb that was attached to the ground? Well, guess what? No, we're not. Okay, it never said anything about being attached to the ground. That was the weird thing about the Rashbam. Where did he get it was attached to the ground? Now, obviously, it had to be attached to the ground. Otherwise, why would it be relevant here? Well, now they're going to say this is totally irrelevant here because we're not actually talking about a honeycomb that was a honeycomb and then attached to the ground. We're talking about a honeycomb detached from the ground. It's just got a unique halacha. Because of this ya'arat hadvash, we're going to say it's like a ya'ar, and anyone who removes honey from it is going to be liable for a korban chatat. Okay, you're asking. I actually was wondering when I started saying it was a beehive. I assume you mean a beehive, right? My problem is I don't understand enough about honeycombs and how they work. So I was thinking a beehive doesn't really mean there's necessarily honey there, though I guess it is. I guess a beehive, I guess you would call it I guess it is a beehive. Okay, so thank you for clarifying the language. It's a beehive that's full of honey, and therefore, right, that's what I was assuming, that a beehive has honeycombs in it. Okay, so we're talking about a beehive that has honey in it, and therefore we're talking about taking the honey off of there. So now we have, this sugya has nothing to do with our topic because it's a unique halacha by beehives, and therefore we're going to move on. So we're still looking for our question within a question. let's just go back and clarify. We started with the Mikvaot Tosefta, which basically distinguished between two types of vessels, right? Two types of pipes. A pipe that was a vessel first and then attached to the ground, or a pipe that was created being attached to the ground, right? Which is one of two things again. Either it was something put in the ground and then hollowed out, or, right, something solid that was then hollowed out, or it was just taken from the ground, basically, dug a hole in the ground to create or dug, chiseled out stone to create this pipe. And then we tried to say, and then the Gemara said, what's going on here? This doesn't seem to match either of the two opinions we know that have positions on this. Then we said, well, before we get to an answer, which position does it work with? We need to know what position what machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis are they even referring to? So first they were looking for Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. So we tried the braita that related to our topic of sales. We said, oh no, that's unique for selling. Then we tried the beehive. We said, oh no, that's unique for honey. It's got its own, and it's not even discussing a case that's similar, that's parallel, because it's not even discussing a beehive that's attached to the ground. It's just discussing a beehive. So now we're moving on. Third source, and now we're actually going to find a source which perfectly fits with the question, which is, this doesn't seem to fit not Rabbi Eliezer and not the rabbis. We're actually going to find it. And then we'll have to answer our question, well, it must fit with one of them. Which one does it fit with? And for that, we're going to try one, not be successful, try the other, and be successful. So now we're going to say, Ella Rabbi Eliezer de daf. It must be Rabbi Eliezer of the daf, not daf Yomi. We're talking about a daf is a board. We're talking about a baker's board. And we're talking about laws of impurity again. We have a lot of laws of impurity today. Because why are we talking a lot about laws of impurity? Because as I said, for something to be impure, it has to be a vessel. So in the laws of impurity, and this is a Mishna Keilim, which is the other long Masechet that's 30 chapters long. There's a few long Masechtot. Anyway, the Bavas are 30 chapters long. If you put them all together, Keilim is also 30 chapters long. There it talks about, again, we have to figure out what is considered a vessel, because a vessel will be impure. And if it's not a vessel, because it's attached to the ground, and we're going to view it as attached to the ground, then it won't be impure. So this is an issue that's very relevant to how do we view things that are attached to the ground or not. Are they vessels for impurity, just like we had, or are they vessels for mikveh, right, for mayim shuvim? So we're going to compare. Ditnan. Now here it says, daf shel nachtomim. It's a baker's board. Okay, it's a board the bakers used. I don't know, maybe they used to put breads out on. Shekava'o bakotel, which is attached to a wall. Now, the big thing here doesn't really say it, but the assumption is here, there's no distinction like in the Tosefta Mikvaot. All it says is, it's attached to the wall. Now, it could be, what they assume is, it's actually both options. It could be, it was a board that was then attached to the wall. And let's assume right now, a wooden board that was basically put into the wall. Now, the wall is attached to the ground. So if it's attached to a wall, which is attached to the ground, it's in essence attached to the ground. So it's a cleat that you then attach to the ground. Or, because it doesn't specify, it could be, it was something that you put into the wall and then created, you sanded it down and made it nice to be a board. Before that, it was, could have been a very unuseful, I don't know, you basically shaped it while it was attached to the wall. The assumption is we're talking about both options. And what you're going to see in this Mishnah is they don't distinguish between the options. And now you can already see why it's not going to fit with the Tosefta at all. Because one is going to say, oh, it's like the ground and it doesn't become impure. And the other is going to say, no, it's a vessel and it does become impure. And then neither is going to match the Tosefta Mikvaot, because in Mikvaot, they distinguish. It depended on the situation. So that's our issue here. And that's why we're going to say, oh, look, it doesn't match the rabbis. It doesn't match Rabbi Eliezer. So let's read it in Rabbi Yosi. Daf shel nachtomim shekava'o bakotel, Rabbi Eliezer mitahel, v'chachamim mitamim. So again, we're going to have two extreme positions here. It doesn't matter if it was attached, if it was first attached and created, where then obviously it's considered attached to the ground according to Rabbi Eliezer. But even if it was a board first and then attached to the ground or attached to the wall, which is attached to the ground, it's still considered attached to the ground. And therefore, it will end up being, not impure, right? It doesn't create impurity at all because it's considered attached to the ground. And therefore, that doesn't fit with the Mishnah, with the Tosefta Mikvaot, because the Tosefta Mikvaot said if it was created first as a vessel, it'll be called a vessel. And Rabbi Eliezer doesn't say that here. And Chachamim mitamim, the rabbis say it's impure. Let's just read it inside. Mane, and this is just a review of what I just said. Who does this pull at? Rabbi Eliezer, afilu chakiko levasof kavao. If it's Rabbi Eliezer, he says here, even if you created it first and then put it in the ground, it's still considered the ground, attached to the ground, viewed like the ground. And in mikvaot, we're going to view that as a kli, and we're going to say it disqualifies the water because it was in a vessel first. So basically, he's more strict. The Tosefta in mikvaot is stricter than Rabbi Eliezer here. And Rabbanan afilu kavao levasof chakiko nami. And if we go with the rabbis who said it's impure and said it's impure in both scenarios, well then, in the case of the mikveh, it also doesn't fit because the mikveh said kivao ulevasof chakiko. If you took it out, you created the pipe in the ground, right? Either adding something to the ground and then hollowing it out, or you hollowed it out from the ground straight directly, it's considered okay when it comes to mikveh. Now, according to this, it can create impurity. It can be susceptible to impurity. If so, well, then it doesn't match the opinion there, right? So now we're going to have a problem. Here he's more strict than mikvah. So Rabbi Eliezer is more lenient, and the rabbis are more strict in this source, because again, it makes sense. They each hold extreme positions here, and there's a middle position. So that's, now we finally understood why the Gemara asked the question and said, this Tosefta doesn't seem to match Rabbi Eliezer, it doesn't seem to match the rabbis. To which the Gemara answers, here's our answer, although I already told you before, you might not remember, this was a little in advance, but the Gemara is now going to try one approach to say, oh, it really fits with Rabbi Eliezer, and they're going to explain, and then they're going to reject it. Actually, on 2 counts, they're going to reject it. And then they're going to actually say it actually fits with the rabbi's position. So how so? La'olam Rabbi Eliezer. Now remember, Rabbi Eliezer here is much more lenient than in the other case of the mikveh. So we're going to have a reason why Rabbi Eliezer would be more lenient in the case of the baker's board, rather than in the case of mikvah where he'll be more strict. Why is that? Well, shane pshute kli'etz detuma de Rabbanit. Now, if we view this case in Mishna Keilim, the Tumen Tara case of the baker's board, as a wooden board. Now, let's just, again, we're going to review all sorts of halachot of Tumen Tara, not getting into too much detail, but one of the basic rules is for something to be a vessel, besides not being attached to the ground, right, which is, or perhaps not being attached to the ground is one issue. Another issue is usually a vessel has a receptacle in it, right? It's like a bowl or a plate, something to hold. If it's totally flat, then depends what it's made of and whether it's really susceptible to impurity on a Torah level or not. If it's totally flat, so it doesn't really have a receptacle, on the other hand, it could be used for things. So the rules are, and I'm not going to get into why, but the rules are that if it's metal, it's susceptible to impurity on a Torah level. If it's wood, it's only susceptible to impurity on a rabbinic level, not on a Torah level. So a flat wooden board, which is what we think this Mishna Keilim is talking about, is actually only forbidden by only becomes impure by rabbinic law. So if that's the case, they say, oh, let's explain it perfectly. La'olam Rabbi Eliezer. Why is Rabbi Eliezer more lenient here? Because that's what happened. Rabbi Eliezer was more lenient and said, either which way, we're going to view it as attached to the ground, not susceptible to impurity, because the whole case is only forbidden midrabanan. It's only impure midrabanan. I shouldn't use the word forbidden. It's impure. Impure midrabanan. Shani kli'etz detuma derabanan. Okay, it's only impure on a rabbinic level, and that's why when it comes, so let's just spell it out. When it comes to the laws of impurities, since it's a wooden board and it's only since the subject there is a wooden board, and it's only susceptible to impurity by rabbinic law. Once it's attached to the ground, it doesn't matter which order it was done in. it's not going to become impure at all. Not going to be susceptible to impurity. But if we're talking about a mikveh and a pipe, which is obviously has a receptacle, that's the whole idea, water's going to go through it, then we're going to be stricter. And there we're going to distinguish, was it a vessel first? Then it's a problem. If it was a vessel only when it was attached to the ground, we'll be lenient. But the Gemara has two problems with this. Number one, michlal, from here you can infer what? That obviously, if Rabbi Eliezer is going to be lenient in the case of the Mishna Keilim, the baker's board, specifically because it's rabbinic law, and more right where he's going to be more lenient here because it's rabbinic law, and going to be more strict when it comes to mikveh, it must be because mikveh is doraita, right? That the issue that the water can't pass through a vessel on its way to the mikveh, or can't have been in a vessel before it goes to the mikveh, mayim shuvim. Michlal de she'iva deoraita must be a Torah law, right? That's the whole premise of this answer. Well, turning now to Amud Bet, that's not true. Ha'kaimalan de Rabbanit. So first problem with this answer is, we know that mayim shuvim disqualifies a mikveh only on a rabbinic level. It's a law, not by Torah law. It's a rabbinic law. So that's number one. In which case, if you're going to be lenient in the madaf of nachtomim and more strict, and you're going to distinguish between the cases in the law of mikveh, it makes no sense because that's Rabbanit and that's doraita. No, that's also Rabbanit. They're both Rabbanit, so the law should be the same. Ve'od. And furthermore, where'd you get this idea that it's pshutei kli'etz that are only forbidden by rabbinic law? It's actually the opposite. It's actually pshutei klei matechet. It's flat metal implements, which are forbidden by Torah law. How do we know this? Because Ha'amar Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina was actually somebody else was talking about this mission in a different context. Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina, who's also an Amora, and said b'daf, not also an Amora, he happens to be an Amora, b'daf shamatechet machloket. He said about that mission in Keilim, the machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis is about a baker's board made of metal, which carries impurity by Torah law. So this answer doesn't work at all. Number one, it's not rabbinic. Okay, if we go in reverse order, right? That's really the basic. It's not forbidden by rabbinic law because it's actually metal. And number two, right? If you were going to say it's forbidden by rabbinic law, I'm saying in the reverse order, I don't know why I just got into my head like that. But number one reason was also if that's rabbinic law, when we know mayim shuvim is also rabbinic law. So can't be Rabbi Eliezer. But everything we just said leads us to say then, oh, well, that works perfectly then with the rabbis. Because remember the rabbis' position. The rabbis are much stricter. Remember, each one had an extreme position. Rabbi Eliezer was incredibly lenient when it came to the baker's board. And the rabbis were actually much stricter there. Well, now it's going to make sense why they're much stricter there based on what we just said. Because number one, it's matechet, which is by Torah law. And the mayim shuvim is only by rabbinic law. And that's what we're going to explain right now. La'olam rabbanani. So now we're going to say, and this is the conclusion, even though we will have a difficulty with this, but we'll resolve it. La'olam rabbanani v'shani shiva de rabbanan. Now, don't get confused with the rabbanan and de rabbanan. Those are two different things. La'olam rabbanan, means, we're finally going to answer our question. The Tosefta Mikvaot follows the rabbi's position. And how can we explain it? Why did the rabbis there distinguish between a vessel that was a vessel and then connected to the ground, which we'll treat as a vessel, or upright, that's the pipe, or that was created as a pipe and then attached to the ground, as opposed to a pipe which was created in the ground, where we'll be lenient? Why the rabbi's going to be lenient there, but when it comes to the baker's board, we're going to say no matter what, it doesn't matter if it was created when it was attached to the wall or created and then attached to the wall, we're going to be strict, very simply because that's Torah law. And shani she'iva de rabbanan, mayim she'uvim, in the mikveh case is only rabbinic. So because it's rabbinic, we'll be lenient when you actually created the pipe, when it was attached to the ground, and we'll view it like the ground. But when it comes to Torah law, we're going to be strict either which way. And that's a great answer. However, the Gemara has a question. It says, wait a minute. If you're going to say that mayim she'uvim is only rabbinic and we can be lenient, well, I'll just say it outside first and then we'll read it inside. Why don't you be lenient all the way and say both these cases, once it's attached to the ground, right, which like I said yesterday, that would make laws of building mikvahs much simpler, right? And just say, oh, well, it's all rabbinic law, so why don't we just be lenient across the board? And even if it was a pipe first and then attached to the ground, it should work. So ihachi afilu chakiko levasof kavonami. If it's all rabbinic, then why don't we be lenient all the way and just say, right? If so, ihachi, even chakiko, even if you created the pipe and then put it in the ground, we should be lenient. Nami, also, we should be more lenient there. Well, we can't be that lenient because even though it's only rabbinic, that was called a vessel. And then it got attached to the ground. So it's very hard to be lenient in that case and say we're going to call this the ground. And therefore, they're not going to be lenient, even though it's only rabbinic. So we finally answered our question. Okay, to review this section before we move on, our next topic, I'll just review from here, which is, again, we started with the Tosefta. We started really with our Mishnah. From there, we got to a braita, which showed there was a machloket about this machteshet kvua, machteshet mitaltelet, right? Whether we have an object that was a utensil that was attached to the ground, whether we're going to view that was really the big machloket, whether we're going to view that, according to Rabbi Eliezer, we're going to view that as attached to the ground, it's going to be sold with the house. According to the rabbis, not going to be sold with the house because it's not viewed as attached to the ground, even though it is attached to the ground. And we thought when we quoted this Tosefta Mikvaot, which distinguished between those two things, and then the Gemara said, well, this doesn't seem to match Rabbi Eliezer, it doesn't seem to match the rabbis. Who does it match? Which before we answer the question, we had to figure out which opinion of the rabbis and the rabbis were we talking about. We thought maybe it was Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis in that braita, but that didn't work because we could say sales are unique, right? It's got unique laws because of mocher ba'in yafa ra'an. Maybe that's the machloket there. Has nothing to do with vessels and land, what's it considered attached to the ground in general. Then we tried the beehive case where they also have a machloket about the beehive that's attached to the ground. In the end, we said it's actually not attached to the ground. It's got a unique halacha there, and that's what Rabbi Eliezer said it. Nothing to do with our topic. And then we finally came up with this daf shel naktomim, which really, as each one had an extreme position, nobody had the depends on how it was created. Neither position seemed to work. And then eventually we understood after trying to connect it with Rabbi Eliezer, we then said, no, it definitely can't be Rabbi Eliezer. And then we say it's like the rabbis. And there's just a difference there because the whole law of mikveh is only rabbinic about not laws of mikveh in general are rabbinic, but the law of mayim shuvim, disqualifying a mikveh, water collected in a vessel, is only rabbinic. And therefore we're going to be lenient. But we're not going to be completely lenient and say any kind of thing that's attached to the ground. No, it would have to be only, according to the rabbis, if it was first a vessel and then attached to the ground, that's going to disqualify the mikveh. But if it was hollowed out from the ground, that will consider attached to the ground. Now we have two more sugyot. One we'll do today and one we'll finish up tomorrow, which is two more sugyot that are discussing this in-between thing about something that's a vessel but attached to the ground and other ramifications of it. So now we need some more background about laws of impurity. Let's talk about food. Let's talk about food that's attached to the ground, grows from the ground, vegetables, things like that, fruits that are attached to trees. While they're attached to the ground, they are not susceptible to impurity. As soon as they get detached from the ground, they're also not yet susceptible to impurity. And before I explain why, let's move to vessels. When does the vessel become impure? When you finish creating it, okay? It has to be finished creating in order, if it's still not usable in any way, and there's all these discussions, at what point is it usable? Maybe it's not when it's fully complete, but when it can be used for something, okay? But that's for a vessel. When it comes to food, the parallel to that is putting a liquid on it. Usually water, but it could be one of 7 liquids. The Rashi Tevot, the way to remember, Yad Shachat Dam, for all 7. I'm not going to go through them right now. Once a liquid comes upon them, then if, let's say, there was someone who was impure who touched it, they would pass on impurity to the food. But there's a big caveat, which is it has to be, and it's because of the psukim in the Torah, ki yutan alav mayim, ki mayim yutan, I forget exactly the wording, ki mayim yutan al zera. It has to be that the water, either you put it on because you wanted it on there. Okay, there has to be intentionality about it. If I didn't want the water to be on it or whatever liquid to go on it, then it doesn't become susceptible to impurity. If I wanted it, then it does. There has to be an issue of wanting it. Just like if I, like a kli, it's all about my intent. I want to have a vessel. So now it's complete, or now it can be used, right? A lot of what your thoughts are plays an important role. What if rain comes down? Now, rain can make something susceptible to impurity, but only if I wanted the rain to come on it. Now, let's say, here's where it gets complicated. If I have this machteshet that we've been talking about, this mortar, and in it, I have, or they're going to call it, they're going to talk about actually the itztrobil, okay, but they're going to compare it to the laws of machteshet kvu'ah, but let's just talk about the itztrobil. So I have my millstone, and I have my grains of wheat in there, and rain comes down, and I'm very happy that the rain came down on, okay, maybe we shouldn't discuss millstone, okay, let's say I have a bowl, and my bowl is a little dirty, and I'm thrilled that the rain is coming on the bowl. In the bowl, there happen to be some fruits. So I don't really want the fruits to get wet, but I wanted the bowl to get wet. If the fruits are in the bowl and I wanted the bowl to get wet, that actually makes my fruit susceptible to impurity, even though I didn't want the fruits to get wet, but I did want the bowl to get wet and the fruits are in the bowl. If the fruits are on the ground, though, and I wanted the ground to get wet from the rain, but I didn't want the fruits to get wet, well, that's not creating susceptibility to impurity because it has to be in a vessel in order for that to work. Okay, that's the key thing you have to remember right now, so I'll just repeat it. If the food is in a vessel and I want the vessel to get wet, I don't want the fruits to get wet, and the rain comes down, since I wanted the vessel to get wet, that already creates susceptibility to impurity for the fruits as well. But if it was on the ground and I wanted the ground to get wet, I didn't want the fruits to get wet, it doesn't work because it's on the ground. So now the big question becomes by Rabbi Yosi. Let's read it inside. Make shamim. Shechashav alehem ladiach et itztroblin. The rain starts, and I'm thrilled because my itztroblin, my millstone, the bottom part of my millstone, is getting finally cleaned. I didn't want to clean it myself. The rain is coming down. Great, it's cleaning it. And there's grains of wheat in there. Mahu lazra'im. What's the case with these zra'im, okay, with the grains that are inside? Because now we have a bit of a tricky situation, the same one we've been discussing. Is an itztrobil considered a vessel, or is it considered the ground because it's attached to the ground? Now, it's a little tricky. They're asking about the itztroblin because in the sale case, if you remember, the itztroblin was considered part of the house, according to everybody. There was no machloket about it. So the Rashbam addresses this situation and says, this is really, the question is really, even though it's talking about an itztrobil, it's relating more to the machloket Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis about the machteshet kvu'ah and not. Okay, and why is that? Because he gives an explanation. In itztrobil, no, you could say that when it comes to impurity, there's a debate about the itztrobil, even though everyone agreed when it came to the sale of a house, because he claims that the itztrobil is basically meant to be attached to the ground in the first place, and therefore we'll view it as part of the sale of the house, even though for this issue, we're going to have a question. I'm going to put that issue aside, okay? But basically, the Rashbam says our question is really going to be, and we'll see right now, it relates to this machloket about the machteshet kvu'ah or not. Because again, we'll just say sales a little bit different than impurity. Aliba de Rabbi Eliezer to Amal, kolam chubar la karka reu kekarka del. Forget about sales. We learned this already in the other cases. Rabbi Eliezer distinguishes between, right, again, depending on but Rabbi Eliezer generally says if it's attached to the ground, it's like the ground. So according to him, lo tibailach, for sure we don't have a question. Because Rabbi Eliezer, right, which we saw with the daf shal nachtumim, clearly holds anything attached to the ground is treated like the ground. So of course, it's not going to create susceptibility to impurity. But here's our question. Ki tibailach aliba de Rabbanan de amal eno kikarka mai. Now, why is there a question? Okay, let's explain. So the Gemara says, our question is really according to the rabbis. The rabbis make this distinction between, they say that, not a distinction, they say basically, if it's a vessel that was attached to the ground, we treat it as a vessel. Well, then it should be obvious. Then it should create susceptibility to impurity here because it's a vessel. Well, we're still going to ask the question, why? Okay, good question. So the Rashbam explains it. Okay, we'll go with the Rashbam's explanation because it's not so clear why there's a question here. So basically what the Rashbam says is, okay, if you're looking Ki Tibai la Chaliba de Rabbanan, and it's a long Rashbam, it starts on the bottom of this page, it goes to the next page, okay, where they disagree with Rabbi Eliezer and the Machtesha Kfu'ah. Do we say, okay, I'm just skipping a few words and translating. Do we say the opinion of the rabbis is that it's a general principle for everything? Kol talush ulevasof chibro chashiv talush, and therefore lamachar takfuah. Do we say that what they said about the machteshet kfuah, that it's not considered part of a sale because it's viewed as a vessel, is also going to hold true in Didei Tumah B'Tara? Okay, we're going to treat it as a vessel. We're going to treat it as a vessel for this as well. That's one option. However, now I'm skipping a few lines to the next page in the Rashbam. Okay, mine, it comes on the third line in the Rashbam, but some Gemaras have different. Okay, but I'm starting with the words Odilma ta'amayu gabe machteshet, or perhaps when it, again, we're going back to where we ended yesterday. Perhaps in the case of sales, it's different. Mishum to be ayin ra'a mochel. Maybe the machteshet kfuah disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer only because he says, oh, that's not included in a sale. Why? Because when someone sells property, they're going to be as stingy, as sparing as possible. But maybe when it comes to hechsher l'kabel tumah, maybe we will view this itztrobil as a kli. Because, again, this is really the big deliberation. While it's attached to the ground, but yet it's a vessel, we just don't know where to put it. So it could be for sales, we'll put it in one place, but for tumah, we'll put it in a different place, because really it is kind of in between. It is a vessel, but it is attached to the ground. How do we view it? So it's possible that we would make a distinction, and the Gemara ends with teku. We don't have an answer. We really don't know. That's an interesting thing to not know, because we just don't know how far do we take this machloka between them when it comes to the machteshet kfuah. Again, this is a mortar that's then glued to the ground. Rabbi Eliezer for sure views it like the ground. The rabbis, when it comes to sales, view it like a vessel. Question is, though, would they think, though, when it comes to susceptibility and purity, maybe because it's attached to the ground, it really is viewed like the ground, and we don't have an answer. The next section, I'm really not going to read today, but I'll just start the first few words that appear in our daf, because it's really just the intro. And here we have the final sugya about how do we view an itztrobil and other things that are attached to the ground. Are they viewed like attached to the ground things, or are they viewed like, and this is just a different ramification entirely of whether we view something as metaltalin or karka, as movable or attached to the ground. So Rabbi Nechemia, the son of Rabbi Yosi, sends to Rabba, Berei de Rav Huna Zute Lenaharda. So Rabbi Nechemia, the son of Rabbi Yosi, sends to Rabba, who's the son of Rav Huna Zute, the small Rav Huna from Naharda. And he basically sends him the following thing. When this woman comes to you with this issue she's going to have, this is how you should rule. And we'll see what this is tomorrow. It has a totally different topic, but it relates to this issue of how do we view things that are attached to the ground? Are they like land, or are they like movables? So it's just another ramification of what we've been discussing. So the first part of the daf we already reviewed. So now the last part is very simple. It's just this question of Rav Yosef about when water, rain, for example, falls on a vessel that's attached to the ground. According to Rabbi Eliezer, for sure it doesn't make whatever's in that vessel susceptible to impurity, because he views it as the ground. However, a question is asked about the rabbis. Perhaps they view it like a kli, just like in sales, or perhaps sales are different and they view it like the ground. And then, like I said, we're going to start another sugya, one last sugya about things that are attached to the ground. How do we view them, like land or like movables? With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and B'sorot Tovot.